Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to Boxing Unwrapped. It's Boxing Unwrapped, the boxing podcast that's asking for an in-out referendum on the WBC. I'm Ryan.
I'm Andrew. Also the boxing podcast that gets more votes than Theresa May in the House of Parliament.
Oh, shit. Oh, class. Right, so that's all our jokes for this week, guys. We're out.
We're out.
So, guys, we've got a really good episode for you this week, which is probably quite timely. We're going to be talking about the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board. What is it? Why should you care? And why should you follow their stuff? So, Andy, do you want to tell the good people what we'll be talking about?
Yeah, well, basically, as you mentioned, the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into them. Explain kind of the context within which they was born and the why, and the kind of outcomes and the impact that they've had on boxing, and really kind of put them in a place so we can understand what they're supposed to be doing and just how noble they are.
And with that in mind, guys, let's jump into who the F are the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board. You know, this is like definitely someone that we have referenced a number of times since our inception and like talked about them a little bit, but we've never really explained anything about them. But probably to really understand why they're even important, we probably need to talk a little bit of boxing history.
I think we do. I think it's unavoidable, but I think it's okay. We don't have to go back as far as like 1817 or whatever it was that I did a couple of weeks ago. We don't have to go that far. I mean, but we do have to go
go a little bit further. And, you know, this is like the kind of late 19th century when John L. Sullivan became like the first world champion in professional boxing, and he got awarded a title which was then known as the National Boxing Association. This sanctioned its first title fight actually in 1921 between Jack Dempsey and George Carpentier, and it is
Carpentier.
Is that Carpentier? Yeah, it's not like carpenter. It's like a drunk Irishman.
I thought you were having a stroke.
No. It's actually spelt like a drunk Irishman would say it. Carpentier. Which is probably quite apt. Like, let's not talk about the backstop, but like, you know, fuck.
Let's not. No one wants to talk about the backstop. It is legally binding. It's not legally binding. It is legally binding. Well, it's not really legally binding, is it? It is. No, it's not. I'm not voting for that. Screw you,
man. Fuck that. Anyway, we digress. So, in 1962, the NBA then became the WBA, which is the World Boxing Association. And so really it is like, you know, the first sanctioning body which would sanction fights. You know, it awarded the champions, and, you know, everything was streamlined and simple. But that only lasted a few months because in February 14th, 1963, like, you know, less than 6 months after the World Boxing Association was started, the WBC came along and went, "Hey, fuck your Panama shit, right? We don't need no stinking WBA. We're the real deal. We're the WBC." They actually established some of the more like safety measures that existed. So, you know, standing 8 counts, a limit of 12 rounds instead of 15, and they actually added some weight divisions as well. Then came along the American Challenger, which was the IBF, which we went into in one of our very first episodes. We went through like a deep dive in all of these. And this was actually because there was a bit of a problem of promoting American boxers, and also they wanted unbiased ratings because some of the American members felt that the WBA was biased towards Latin American fighters. Incidentally, the IBF then had a pay for ranking scandal later that we can go into another point, which was kind of ironic. And then 1988, we end up with the WBO. So we have now gone from 1 to 4 sanctioning bodies, all with a different champion. And the question is, who the fuck is the actual champion? You know? Now, the Ring magazine was known as the kind of administrator of lineal champions. And Andy, do you want to remind the listeners what we mean by a lineal champion?
So the lineal champion is the person who can be agreed upon as the best fighter within a specific weight division.
Yeah.
And the way in which that's kind of formulated has sort of been tinkered with and changed over the years. But you're basically saying about when the 1 and 2 fighters within the division fight, the winner of that would then be considered to be the best fighter and would then be considered to be the lineal champion.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and the idea is that you should pretty much be able to trace it all the way back. So, you know, the Ring was able to have like a sequence of champions all the way back to the 20s. However, there were some problems that happened. And the Ring magazine decided to change the way it managed who was a champion and who wasn't, and how they figured that out. And some argue that this is down to it being purchased by Golden Boy Promotions.
Yeah. So if you kind of think about something that would be comparable, it's like someone who has a stable of fighters, who has a vested interest in the promotion of specific fighters, who therefore by definition is not possible for them to be completely impartial, is then the owner of what is supposed to be the impartial overseer of boxing rankings. So can anyone see why there might be an issue with this? It's kind of like, it's like Man U buying UEFA and going, no, it's fine, we'll be fine. We will not favour we will not make it easy on ourselves. I promise. And when Golden Boy bought the Ring magazine, they did promise. At the time, the man who comes up in boxing all of the time, Richard Schaefer, was the CEO of Golden Boy, and he said, "We won't get involved in the editorial side of the rankings." Now, of course, they did get involved in the editorial side of the rankings, and as you alluded to, the editorial board reworked the championship policy, i.e. they changed the way in which you could crown a champion without any consultation of the ratings panel, who are the people that are supposed to be involved in determining who's in what position, and they did it in such a way as to make it more subjective and actually there were then lots of occasions where they were applying a double standard based on whether it was a Golden Boy staple fighter.
Yeah. You might say, well, actually, why is it important to have an independent body overseeing, you know, who's a champion? You know, what does it really matter? You know, the governing bodies can do it themselves. And I've got a great little story about why they can't. There was an American super middleweight called Darren Morris, and he won 17 fights in a row, right? He'd only fought twice for a grand total of 2 completed rounds in 31 months. But regardless, victory in July 1999 was enough to make him in the top 10 of WBO ranking. Then after a year of complete inactivity, Morris then slipped to 11th. However, despite not throwing a single punch, he started to ascend in the rankings. He jumped 2 places to 9th in the August before rising to 7th in the October, right? He was 6th in December and an all-time high of 5th in January 2001. And this, by the way, he hasn't fought at all. Then, suddenly, this guy was being touted as a potential opponent for the WBO belt holder, Joe Calzaghe, right? And this looked like his kind of breakthrough. However, there was an issue, okay? Morris had died of HIV-related meningitis in October 2000. So, not only once, but twice had the WBO moved a lifeless corpse up their super middleweight rankings, right?
I mean, we're not laughing at the fact that he died. That's
No.
not funny. But I mean, the absurdity in that situation is like spectacular.
Exactly. So, not only are we talking about a fighter who has gone up rankings without even throwing a punch, but the fact that the man has been dead for 4 months and he's actually like climbed up the rankings twice in that period is absolutely mental.
It beggars belief, does it?
Like
it's just
he dies in October 2000. In January 2001, he's 5th in the WBO.
Isn't
it is actually insane if you think about it.
It's a wonder they didn't roll him out to fight.
Totally like a Weekend in Bernie's plot.
It's just unbelievable to be that incompetent, because like surely you wouldn't be doing it on purpose, because you just look so incredibly foolish. There can't be any incentive that's big enough for it to be worthwhile looking that stupid.
Exactly.
It's
so it has very much to do with the fact that the rankings are not clear. And I think that this is probably, and the governing bodies have their own politics of why they rank certain fighters in a certain way and give certain fighters a title shot.
Yes, they all have different influences in terms of like national, in terms of like the different fighters and the different promoters, etc., etc. They all have different incentives. I was going to say that one of the articles that you sent me the link to nicely summed up the rankings of the different bodies, saying that they were flawed, malleable, and opaque ranking systems. So that's basically what all of the individual bodies have. The other thing to bear in mind, obviously, is you've got this proliferation of organizations, and then obviously all the different belts within the organizations. And remember, they're all incentivized to do this because they're all getting a proportion of the money that's generated through all these fights. So to give them these kind of like token belts and make them token title fights generates more interest, generates more revenue. So they're incentivized to do it more and more to like an absurd level. And the other thing, obviously, they're incentivized to do is to protect the more marketable fighters. They're incentivized to protect them because obviously they're generating more revenues, and then their percentage of those revenues is going to be, or their revenue as a percentage of the overall revenue will be higher the bigger the pot is. So they're very much, the systems are designed to protect the most marketable fighters. So you have to have governing bodies and people within them who are actually deliberately working against their incentives if they were going to be fair, if that makes sense. So you have to have like incredibly people with an incredible level of integrity for it not to collapse and end up in this just like kind of like racketeering, which is where we've ended.
100%.
Where it's all a sham. And that's and then that's the basis, that's the foundation upon which we need to have someone to give us an impartial view. And that was the Ring magazine. And then it was like you know, like like in Lord of the Rings, and the power of the ring corrupts. That's what happened. It's funny that they're called the ring, actually.
Could you imagine just Oscar De La Hoya just sitting in his office, my precious, as he snorts a ton of coke off a hooker?
Yeah. Just being like, I can use it. It won't control me. I'll control it.
Because they changed the rules into a weird system. So, as we discussed, like the idea of a lineal champion is number one, fights number two, so actually who is the lineal champion, who is the top, right? But they changed the rules so that actually, if there was a vacant lineal title, actually, you could have number 2 and number 5 fight, and then one of them would be the lineal champion. So number 5 has jumped all the way up to number 1, but he hasn't fought 2, 3, or 4. So you don't actually know if he is the man who beat the man because he's not the best out there.
Yeah, he's not demonstrated being.
But if he was one of the Golden Boy stables, it fucking makes sense to have him at the top.
Yeah, and the other thing that I read about was how one of the early instances that enraged, and this was in 2012, wasn't it, when they started fucking about with it, where so there was a complete double standard where they removed Marco Huck from cruiserweight rankings because he fought a fight at heavyweight, but then Mayweather jumped division, I think, to fight Cotto, and he retained his ranking, and the justification was, Huck would have stayed at heavyweight if he won, and Mayweather was just moving up as a one-off for money, and it's like, hold on a minute, you can't be doing shit. Like, that's totally... that's a totally applying a double standard. You can't go, the reasons behind it were this, and this. Therefore, we're applying a completely different outcome, a completely different decision to the same behaviors. It's like that's utter mince. And obviously, Mayweather was was a Golden Boy fighter at that point.
And so you had these 3 guys who were writers for the Ring magazine who lost their shit, right?
They served on the ratings panel, which was supposed to have the influence about saying which fighters are in which position within the ring.
Yeah, and they were done with like all the different regular, super, diamond, gold, fucking platinum belts out there, and they just kind of lost their shit. So Springs Toledo, Cliff Rolled, and Tim Starks. They resigned from the Ring magazine's rankings board, and they wrote fucking articles saying "fuck you, the Ring." We'll put some of these up on the Facebook page, guys, because they're really interesting because they clearly lay out how it's become corrupted and why they've decided to hang up their hats and say we're off, we're fucking done. And that is where the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board came from. And, they have a charter which pretty much helps them be as independent as physically possible. They've set out their membership, so they have always have 25 members and 3 chairmen. And they, try and get as many reflections of countries as possible. You can only become a member through invitation. So, unfortunately, Andy, our dream of working for the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board is not quite there. We can't just, drop in an application. It's not like, if you want to apply to be a boxing promoter and you just, send off, the back of a fag packet and your fucking passport and 25 quid.
We should make an effort. We should see what we need to do. What are the hoops to jump through?
I don't know. I think it's probably knowing something about boxing. You might need to do that.
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a bit tough, isn't it?
They have their website. They put their rankings on the website. They are published on or by every Tuesday. They put up the contenders, the weight divisions, whether or not there's a champion, whether or not it's vacant, everything. And, it's really, really good. They also set out the fact that, about breaks in fighting. which I think is very, very important to all of this, because they say if a contender is inactive for a year or more, he will be removed from the rankings until such time as he fights and earns back a place in the top 10. Which I think is where we obviously need to highlight the matter of Mr. Tyson Fury.
Yeah, which was obviously back in the day when we were, kind of ragging on him a little bit, and it was to do with especially people calling him lineal, because I hope part of the episode goes some way to explain, why we were kind of adamant about the positioning of that, why this is the only organisation which is impartial and can kind of make judgment on it, and we were following their judgment.
Absolutely.
And they are like expert and impartial and unpaid, unaffiliated is important to
totally.
say as well.
It's 100% independent. There's no money in this at all. This is just done for the love of the sport. And,
crikey, if you look at their website, that's very
fuck me, man. It is pretty fucking basic. Like, it's basic shit. But, like...
See, when you try and go on their website, does your browser bring up like a danger message saying like this is completely insecure and you shouldn't, unless you're very comfortable, you shouldn't advance to this page?
Do you know why that is? And I'm going to tell you why. Is
this an IT lesson?
It is an IT lesson. It's because they don't have HTTPS encryption.
I was thinking that.
So you just have to apply for it.
Can I do that in Excel?
You can't do it
in Excel. I'm not interested in.
You can't do it in Excel, but it's pretty straightforward. Like if they had like anyone with a simple understanding of like of website management, like they could get it done in about 5 minutes. That's all. But it doesn't really matter because they don't have like any e-commerce on their website or anything. So.
But no, people won't even go on to it because you have to click through a yes, I accept the risk message. So I bet you they get loads of people turn away who would actually at least visit the page. But also, just in that point there, Ryan, it sounded a lot, and I think the listeners will agree, that you just volunteered to fix their website and take over their like kind of media comms management.
Do you know what? If they get in contact, I will. If they say, do you want to manage our website? I'll be like, yeah, all right, go for it.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, I will email all the members on your behalf. Well, not on your behalf, on their behalf, really, and tell them that they need to get in contact with you, and you will do the service for free for them. And it will be the figures they're like traffic will go through the roof because people won't be scared.
Won't. And do you know what? The only thing is if they put a link to our podcast. That's all I ask. We could be like the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board's like official podcast.
I don't want to get tied down with what we can and can't say, but as long as they don't expect to have any, but that would be against their kind of thing, would it? If they expected to have any kind of like content intervention?
No way, man. We're truly independent through and through.
So apart from having a soon-to-be-fixed shonky website and comm strategy, which is about to be resolved and is going to boost their popularity, I'll talk about that a little bit more. But so they're going to get that fixed. But I hope what we're doing is demonstrating enough of the urgent requirement that existed for them, and the fact that they're fulfilling quite like a vital role and doing it in a kind of selfless way. It's worth saying that some of the three founding members, or the three of the founding members that you mentioned, they're all independently resigned and all independently wrote like scathing articles relating to the ring, and then on the back of that they kind of got chatting to each other and decided that there was an opportunity to do something. But my point is that there were lots of people who all independently, very, very well regarded boxing people, that independently decided that we need to do something. This whole system, people are watching boxing despite the way it's being presented to them in terms of the bodies, etc., despite its illegitimacy a lot of the time, and it's a miracle that it's still going because it's being so mismanaged. And we need to.
But the thing is, here's the thing, right? So from the time that this was set up to now, although yes, they have got these. Good rankings, and it's independent. It's if you were going to say, has it made a difference? No. Do you know what I mean? In the terms that boxing, the stewardship of the sport is still horrendous. every week there's another fucking joke about something ridiculous a sanctioning body has done. And boxing fans are still watching the sport in spite of the ranking bodies, the sanctioning bodies, not because of,
100%, yeah, exactly, yeah. And I suppose part of it fits in with, some of the stuff that we've spoken about in previous episodes about this kind of idea that it's sort of like notoriety fights, and some of the pay-per-views have been very like non-pay-per-view worthy, and this kind of like almost some of this like freak show kind of stuff, circus stuff, there's pay-per-view, and it's like it's about what's in people's like consciousness to start with, and the people that are prominent in their minds, rather than looking at, this is a proper 1v2 fight, and it's so difficult, I think, to re-engage people and to think in those kind of terms again, because obviously it's so muddied the water with all the different bodies and the different belts, etc. It's difficult for people that most of whom dip in and out of the sport to kind of grasp.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and to think about how hard it is to understand boxing, for that very reason, it is a wonder that people are still following the sport.
I mean, it would be so much more easy for fans if it was just like, I know the rankings of these fighters. I know which one is really like number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. So therefore I can go, like this is a fight between like 2 and 3. That's a shit hot fight. Rather than, it could be this champion and this challenger, and like this challenger's dog shit. So it's like, just now, for example, just to illustrate the point, you've got Joshua fighting Miller, who's highly ranked within an organisation. I know heavyweights are short, but I mean he's pretty crap. He's not a very good fighter. And you've got probably now Wilder's going to fight Brazil, and I don't understand how Brazil. I know we've talked about this at length, but Brazil, even within the current heavyweight crop, Brazil is is not one of the best. He's a pretty mediocre fighter. It's pretty.
I mean, if we were to put that in perspective of what the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board are saying, with Anthony Joshua, who is ranked 1 by them, he is fighting the fighter ranked 7th, and Deontay Wilder is not fighting someone who exists in the top 10.
Yeah, I mean, which is right. I mean, Brazil is not one of the 10 best.
And, this is over Dillian White, who's ranked number 4, under Deontay Wilder at number 3.
Yeah, much more appealing. I mean, much more appealing fight.
Of course. So, yeah, basically, it's a fucking shite state of affairs, Andy.
But so one of the things so I read through the article that one of the founding members, Toledo, wrote, and it was called "Occupy the Ring," and which is a reference to the occupation of Wall Street, and it's about saying we need to sort of take the power back, take the responsibility. The 99% of the people, not the racketeers, but everyone else, the fans and the media need to take back kind of ownership about boxing, and the formation of the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board was around that kind of idea. And one of the things they were saying is that we can stop referring to like the different belts people hold, and stop referring to these like paper champions and stuff. And I think I know I'm super guilty of it. Like I've talked a lot about, because it's like it's a hook, to hang on to. You can go like, it's the IBF champion, it's the WBA champion, whereas we just talk about. So we can try in the podcast and after this episode to do it like less and be like, this guy's a top 10 fighter, this guy's a top 10 fighter, this is a proper 1 versus 2 fight, and refer to like their rankings more than the belts, because in a way the belts are a bit kind of like...
Yeah, they're just a marketing tool.
It's about recognising them. Yeah. So we try and look at like the strengths of the fighters and where they rank within divisions rather than what kind of arbitrary belt holding they have. So we'll try and do it and spread the message.
But I think it also it goes to show, that like the money in the sport doesn't want this to succeed, because if it did, their website wouldn't be shut. Although, we've just got to throw this out here: boxing is not known for its web development, right? I'm just saying that right now, right? All the websites are fucking appalling, but no one seems to be giving these guys enough cash to actually grow their brand enough.
Who can give them money though? Who could they get money from? Without it be difficult to find someone which can then be impartial, which can then to not be seen to be trying to influence. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you need someone to give them money who has got no interest in what they do, almost in what they do. Do you know what I mean? Someone you need a philanthropist.
So here we go, right? Once we make our millions, Andy, right, we can set up funding for the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board, so that we keep them going and grow their brand. They need a brand manager, and they do need a brand manager. They need some, because as far as I can see, their website, apart from the fact that it looks like it's some sort of Russian hack fest, apart from that, it hasn't been updated, and apart from the rankings in how many years, totally.
And the only endorsement one of the main endorsement that I can find that they've got is where Teddy Atlas talks about how good the idea
totally
was. But the video's from it's from 6 years ago, and it seems like that's it. They've gone, oh well, we've got our endorsement now from a credible boxing source, so we'll just stop there. We don't need any more. And it's guys, you need to build the momentum, keep the train rolling down the track, man.
Because these guys, the people who sit on this board, their members are well-known, boxing writers from around the world, right? Come on, work together, create a comm strategy, for fuck's sake,
Yeah. Yeah, these are, like you're saying, they're not people that have no experience about communications with the public. This is there's a lot of them are journalists, aren't they? And they're very, very, very high profile, respected journalists.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. It's actually mind-boggling. Just set up a WhatsApp group, guys. At the very least. Talk about who's going to tweet what about what. Give some reaction. Do some behind the scenes stuff of how you decide on what a ranking is, because that would be really interesting. Their kind of meetings and stuff on how they decide what ranking is what and stuff. I don't know, man.
Well, we can put a poll up on the Facebook page, and that'll also tell us how many people listen to our episode. But we'll put a poll up to say how many people know what it is. If we just put the initials and say how many people know what the TBRB
exactly.
is. And I'll bet you, I would, within boxing fan sort of stuff, I think it will be a reasonable percentage. But the casual fans who the broadcasters are relying on for buying pay-per-view, I'll bet you no one knows who they are.
No.
You have to dig to know who they are. You have to be in the loop to know who they are.
Exactly. Imagine having to dig to know what football team is top of the league.
You have to go out of your way to avoid it. You go on, your phone's default page is all football results. It's it's just it is, but it's interesting as well that a lot of people I don't think are fully aware. Again, the more casual, the more likely, but are to not know that the ring, about how kind of irrelevant the ring's made itself by giving away its impartiality. I don't think a lot of people do know it, but a lot of people don't know it, if you know what I mean. There are lots of people who aren't aware about what they've done and just how badly messed it is.
Oh, I know.
So some people think, oh well, he's the ring champion. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything anymore. They don't know it.
It is a joke, man. It is a joke. So anyway, do you have much more to say?
No, like I say, we'll be kind of trying to move away from talking about the different belt holders, although I do like to run off the belt holder names, but we'll try and avoid doing that and more talk about the rankings and reference their rankings more to try and spread the message, and would encourage everyone else to do the same and try and let's take back the power.
I say.
This is where it starts. This is where they get the turbo boost they've been waiting for, and a new comms manager.
Well done, yeah, good stuff. Good for me. Right, guys. Well, we will be back with another top topic next week. But with that in mind, it's goodbye from me, Ryan.
And goodbye from me, Andrew.